Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another quick list video for all of you. We're going to be calling it 5 comic books that were better than I expected. Whether I had initially heard mixed reviews about these titles or I just personally didn't think I would click with the material, these are all books that absolutely exceeded all hopes or expectations that I would really recommend to many readers out there. This was a really fun one to put together, and I can't wait to talk about all the choices today. Before we jump in though, I do want to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, perhaps some of the books on this very video, I encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link to them in this video's description, and if you see anything on their website you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's list video. First on this list, in no particular order, I want to talk about DCeased from Tom Taylor over at DC Comics. If you've never heard of DCeased over at DC Comics, essentially it's in part of the DC multiverse or Elseworlds, kind of the what-if sort of multiverse space. This is what if the DC universe was taken over by a zombie-like outbreak. I had read things similar to this, like Marvel Zombies in the past, so I was a bit hesitant to pick up this book. In fact, while zombie fiction can sometimes be okay, I was largely burnt out on this genre as a whole. Marvel Zombies, from memory, didn't over-excite me, and if I'm honest, I just kind of thought this would under-deliver for me personally. However, I am a fan of Tom Taylor, particularly over here at DC Comics. He's always stricken me as someone who just really understands these characters, what makes them work, and I've largely felt that he plays best in a large sandbox where he can kind of do what he wants with beloved characters. And that's certainly what we have here with DCeased. I know this also spawned multiple sequel miniseries or series. I actually wanted to include this on the list as well because I think it's slated to have an Omnibus release later this summer. This book was definitely beyond my expectations great. It was such a fun read. While I think some people that just don't like zombies at all probably still won't like this, as it is a zombie narrative. If you're like me, where if it's done right you can enjoy the occasional zombie tale, this might be one to definitely consider. I think why this book outperformed for me is because I had the bar set fairly low, and Tom Taylor again just blew me away with his commanding grasp of these characters. While this isn't the mainstream universe for our DC heroes, they play like their actual characters would, just in this wild what-if scenario where a zombie-like outbreak just takes over. I really enjoyed seeing all of my favorite heroes and villains in this harrowing environment. I didn't really know what was going to happen in this survivalist kind of tale, and I was just riveted. You pair that with some gorgeous artwork from end to end, and you have one power-packed little book. I admit I should have gone in with higher expectations, but I am happy I went in how I did because I ended up walking away so satisfied reading this first volume. I would definitely recommend this for fans of zombie narratives, and also just for general fans of the DC universe. Like I said, it's all of your favorite characters in a scenario you may never have anticipated, and it works on just about every level I can fathom. You also just have, again, Tom Taylor. If you've come to love him on his run on Nightwing or some of these other projects he's done, this is definitely among some of his best. And that's why when I think of comic books that have really outperformed for me personally, I have DCeased in that shortlist. Next on this list might be a controversial entry, but this is X-Men X of Swords. This was the first major crossover event in the post-House of X Powers of 10 Krakoa-era X-Men universe over at Marvel Comics. This event now is a couple years old, but it's still a pretty contemporary release. This book definitely exceeded my expectations. After falling in love with House of X Powers of 10, I knew I was going going to be a fan of the broader Krakoa era in general. I was a bit behind being a comic book collected edition fan, and I had heard kind of mixed reviews already as X of Swords was coming out. I heard a lot of people say it failed to live up to the hype, or, the first event just really kind of fumbled. And so when I got this collection, while I was excited, my expectations were a bit tempered just because of some of those mixed reviews I had heard. I should also say as well, I hadn't read all of the Krakoa titles going into this event. I cherry-picked a couple. I think before I picked this up, I was reading some of Excalibur, X-Men, Marauders, maybe one or two others. But I found that I really had everything I needed foundationally to enjoy this book. I mentioned it in my review of this title, but I think some of the most important books, obviously other than House of X Powers of 10 and Hickman's X-Men run, was probably that run on Excalibur, but you can pretty much pick this up anywhere post House of X Powers of 10 and be fairly okay diving in. This event, like I mentioned, is a huge crossover, taking in just about every comic title going on in the X-Men universe at the time, and just streaming one large, maybe 20-issue narrative. There are a couple kind of one-shot issues tied into X of Swords in addition to all of the tie-ins, but it all really blends as one seamless story. I know how Marvel was collecting these in paperback, or at least the hardcovers. Sometimes you would be missing the X of Swords tie-in issue, and in many cases there was with good reason, because it really works best as an event book like this, rather than individual issues in a given run. There are a couple of exceptions, but this is really how X of Swords should be read. They released this paperback along with an oversized hardcover edition, but you can read it end to end and really have a comprehensive experience. It's essentially a Mortal Kombat kind of game or tournament where all of these heroes and villain mutants are assembled between Krakoa and also Arakko, or Araka, whatever, the kind of rival mutant underground nation. And basically they have to draw these kind of mythical powerful swords, and those that basically get the swords get picked for this wild game or tournament. And then the second half of the book, after all of the swords are assembled and the champions are chosen, the second half really deals with that actual all-out battle tournament, the actual X of Swords, and then we have a great resolution by the end. This book was just so much fun, and I'm not sure why it gets such poor reception. Maybe collecting it was a bit of a nightmare, but to have it all in a collected edition, this was just a really strong modern X-Men event, and I still think really fondly of it often. Highly recommend X-Men X of Swords. Next on my list today is actually a Bronze Age comic book run. This is Iron Fist, the Danny Rand early years omnibus, and wow, this one was a real treat. While it did have some explicit materials in that black and white magazine portion, this book is largely a mystical martial arts kind of narrative following the titular Iron Fist. This was also my first foray into a solo title for Danny Rand Iron Fist. I was reading this kind of in conjunction with that Brubaker run later on, but this was the omnibus and run I completed first. It has all of his earliest adventures collected as far as I'm concerned, both in his own titled series and in the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, or whatever that series was, the magazine. So we have a lot of great early Iron Fist stuff here. We have his origins, we have him going to Kunlun and facing off the dragon, and just becoming the Iron Fist. One of the things I felt was so novel about this work was also it really used the second person perspective. So instead of saying Danny did this or I did this in some of the exposition or narrative space, it would say stuff like, you went to this room, you fought these people, and the you meant Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, but it really kind of throws you off balance with that use of second person. I really love that perspective. I thought it was a super unique way to just approach this series. In fact, I've never really read a comic quite like that. The fact that this was also so fresh and well paced, even for an early kind of Bronze Age title, it really just expanded what I viewed as Bronze Age Marvel work, and in the best way possible. I haven't really read a ton of martial arts based comic books, or at least I hadn't at this point, and it made me fall in love with this subgenre within this medium. I've gone on to enjoy other titles like later Iron Fist stories, or even Firepower by Robert Kirkman and Chris Samney, but my real love for this subgenre in comics really began reading this very omnibus Omnibus. I think it's a collection that often gets overlooked, and while I do think that later Immortal Iron Fist and the Immortal Weapons Omnibus is a bit stronger, I still think that this is a very fun omnibus, a really great introduction to this character, and a lot of the issues and adventures, they just are really engaging. I love the characters, the supporting cast, the villains. Like I said, it doesn't really feel as much like a superhero book as it does a mystical martial arts book, and I loved that within the Marvel Universe. This is another one of those books I think of fondly, and it's one I just really wanted to showcase. It absolutely exceeded my expectations, my preconceived notions, and yeah, just a really fun book. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos like this, comic book reviews, unboxing, shorts, interviews, and more. Anyway, thank you for considering. Now let's go ahead and keep this list right on going. Okay, next up is a trade paperback collection coming by way of Image Comics. This is Old Dog Redact 1 by Declan Shalvey. And wow, it's going to be really hard to sell this book without going into spoiler territory, but I'm surely going to try. Why this book absolutely exceeded my expectations is I went in fairly blind. In fact, the reason I picked up this collection was because I had the opportunity to speak to Declan not too long ago on the channel, and I wanted to read something fresh from him to perhaps discuss or really get a better feel for his work, and he wrote, illustrated, everything soup to nuts here for Old Dog, and I just picked this up to have an extra talking point with this creator, and I ended up loving the series. It's an interesting blend of kind of espionage, action, thriller, mixed with sci-fi and almost horror elements. I don't want to go into too much there because even what it plays with genre will lead into some of the spoilers, which I am genuinely trying to avoid. If you want more details or my thoughts on this collection, you can definitely seek out my review of this trade paperback, but in general, I do think that this is very fun for fans of international espionage thrillers with a bit of a twist. The artwork from Shalvey here is absolutely exceptional. The color palette, everything is just really moving, evocative, immersive, and interesting, but the writing is also rock solid. Shalvey has a really commanding grasp of this kind of subgenre of fiction, and it's something that's left me begging for more. In fact, I can't wait for a hopeful volume 2 for this series. I wanted to showcase this as well because it not only exceeded my expectations, but it's also a book that I don't see get enough discussion, especially in this YouTube space, and I thought I'd just raise a bit more awareness for it. If you're a fan of Declan Shalvey's work, whether you've been reading a lot of his written work or his illustrations or something like this where he does double duty, hopefully this is one I could add to your recommendation list. It is a bit violent and a little bit explicit with the violence there, but if that doesn't bother you as much, again, it's one I could pretty safely recommend. For all of its fun genre trappings, it's also deeply character driven in a very compelling way. I felt myself extremely engaged in the primary cast of characters, and like I said, I just genuinely felt myself wanting more by the end in the best way possible, where I'm eager to enter this world again should we have some follow-up from Shalvey. You can see the artwork here though, it really sells itself. It's absolutely breathtaking. To say again that this exceeded my expectations would be a bit of an understatement. I just really didn't have a bar for this. I didn't really know what to expect. I couldn't have gone in more blank slate, and I think that was really to the benefit of this work. I got to experience it on its own terms, and personally I was just delighted all the way through from end to end. If you're curious to pick up perhaps a new read from Image Comics that might just surprise you, I highly recommend Old Dog Volume 1 or Redact 1 from Image Comics by Declan Shalvey. And rounding out our list today, we have The Black Cat by Jed MacKay Omnibus from Marvel Comics. We not only have the written work of Jed MacKay, but we also have comic artists here like Michael Dowling, Travel Foreman, and more. Why this exceeded my expectations, or was certainly better than I expected, was because I didn't know how Black Cat would hold her own book. Granted, I had heard some pretty positive reviews for this title, particularly from Jess over at Omnidog's Vault. I know he was really outspoken about liking this run, and he definitely helped sell me on this title, but it just really blew me away. I read this before I really got all the way through the Moon Knight run by Jed MacKay and his omnibus that I ended up absolutely loving. So Jed MacKay was a newer writer for me, at least on my radar, so I didn't even have that going in. I went in just really knowing knowing this character from the Spider-Man universe or mythos, and I really do like Black Cat as kind of a femme fatale, love interest, sort of playful rival with our favorite webhead, but I didn't know what she would function as in her own series, and I really found myself blown away by Jed MacKay's approach. If you haven't read this run, essentially this is a heist narrative and an ongoing comic book series. And that is really what helped engage me with this work. That, when paired with this eclectic cast of characters that's really given a lot of depth by Jed MacKay, I just really fell in love with this run. We have a couple arcs that are really broken down around these major heists, and I won't really spoil too much of what those heists are, because going in and out of what she's going to try to steal next is half of the fun of enjoying this read. We also certainly get a lot more nuance into Black Cat, her history, her upbringing, her desires, and more throughout this run. She's so much more than just a supporting character for Spider-Man, and this run really transformed the way I looked at this character. We do have an appearance or two by our favorite wall crawler though, and those appearances do really jump from the page, but they are by no means the selling point for this run as a whole. The art throughout does change pretty dramatically, but I found all the art to be serviceable and in many places quite great. I just had so much fun with this run. It definitely helped really show me what Jed MacKay could offer, and then Moon Knight just absolutely cemented me as a fan of this creator. The Black Cat is also an interesting character because in many ways she is not a hero. She's not even quite an anti-hero. She's just kind of an agent for her own ends or means that ultimately has more virtuous underpinnings, and I really loved the way that that was explored throughout this run. Again, the fact that it focused more on a heist angle than a superhero costume vigilante angle was really what helped set it apart, but again, those characters just helped transcend it even more into something I really did love this run. It's one I think about often, and it's one I'm happy to say exceeded my expectations. And with that, we're going to go ahead and bring to a close 5 comic books that are better than expected. This was a very fun list to put together. I don't know if I've ever framed a prompt quite like this, but it was fun digging through my collection and looking at books that really just wowed me for one reason or another. Again, whether that was it performed way better than the reception I was hearing about it, or I went in rather blindly to it and it just really was elevated beyond what I had hoped or expected, these are all books that I just, even right now revisiting, I just have a smile on my face remembering my read-throughs. But there's a lot that could have been added to this list, and I'm curious in the comments, what are books that could easily be on your list that personally reading through them, they were just better than you expected? I would love for our comments section to have a fun, spirited discussion and perhaps just have a wall of great comic book recommendations that perhaps feel like a hidden gem kind of video. Again, this was a particularly fun one to put together, and I hope you guys felt that watching it. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I'll try to link reviews to each of these videos as appropriate and as able, and thank you again so very much. Until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, that comment we talked about, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.